Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Wednesday, Yom Revi'i. Good evening. Great to be learning with you on a Wednesday, Yom Revi'i. Let's light up the darkness. Maybe it doesn't need to be quite that close. Okay. Who's in the house on a Wednesday? Stephen in New Hampshire, Hood in South Carolina, Joseph in Nevada, Bella in Florida, Joe in the Inland Empire, Paul in the Great Northwest, Renee in Indiana, Shandor in the Bronx, Lucy in Minnesota, Bill in mid-Missouri, who just moved into a new apartment. May it be a special place for you where you can grow and blossom, make the connections, and do the work that you were born to do, Bill. And let us say amen. Melissa in Great Neck, Nancy, North Carolina, Lorraine in Texas, Gail in Kansas City, Johnny in Bethel Park, Pennsylvania. That's a new name. Welcome, Johnny. Aoife in Florida, Ilanit in Silver Spring, Ella in Southern California, Chaim in Florida, Alan in New York City, Franco in Trieste, Italy. Wow, must be the middle of the night. Welcome, Franco. Great to have you with us. And Annette in Fort Lauderdale. Welcome. Okay. I will not do a whole diatribe about what's on my mind today because I already did it earlier. And if you'd like to learn about my feud with Haaretz and the op-ed they wrote, attacking Guns N' Moses, and my response, you can see it on the Facebook page or on Instagram. Let us learn together. Our daf today is page 51 here in Tractate Avoda Zara, the 27th volume of the Talmud. Continuing our discussion of Mishna number 1 in chapter 4. We picked this up near the top of page 51a. Rav Nachman says that Rabba bar Avu says that Rav says, in the case of an object of idolatry that is worshipped by means of a stick, recall that in this chapter 4, Mishnah 1, what we're talking about is, well, what constitutes Avoda Zara? Sometimes you can have an object of idolatry. We've been talking about a statue of Mercury. But is a Jew performing an action? If he's performing an action that is the way that that idol is normally worshipped by idolaters, okay, clearly idolatry and prohibited. If the Jew is doing an action that is not the way that that idol is normally worshipped, but it is the kind of offering that we would make, or the kind of worship that we would do in the Holy Temple, when it is standing, and we worship God, we bring offerings to God, but a Jew does that directed at an idol, an object of idolatry, that definitely is going to be a prohibited act. So what if he does something that is neither the way the idol is normally worshipped, nor exactly the way we worship God when the Holy Temple is standing, but is similar? Right, so how similar does it have to be to trigger liability for violating these prohibitions? That's the basic question, right? So in the case of an object of idolatry that is worshipped by means of a stick, maybe yesterday we were talking about when you beat a stick on a bell or a pan or something to make a noise, that's how the idolaters worship that idol. And the Jew didn't do exactly what they do, but he broke a stick in front of it, and that made a noise. If one broke a stick before it, he is liable. And the stick is rendered prohibited because the stick was used in the action of idolatry. If he, the Jew, threw a stick before it, he is liable, as its typical manner of worship involves a stick, but the stick is not rendered prohibited. its typical manner involves a stick, but he threw it. So even though it involves a stick, he didn't do the kind of action that normally is idolatry, so the stick doesn't get rendered prohibited. Rava said to Rav Nachman, what is different about the case where one broke a stick? In this case, the stick is rendered forbidden as it is similar to slaughtering an offering, which is a rite performed in the temple, right? Because he broke the stick. So it's like he offered the stick, right? He broke the stick on behalf of the idol. So too in the case where one threw a stick, it is similar to the sprinkling of the blood on the altar when the temple is standing in Jerusalem, because there's a throwing action. So Rav Nachman said to Rava, in order for a sacrificial rite to be similar to the sprinkling of blood, we require a form of throwing that scatters the offering, and that is not the case here. There's no scattering when we just throw one stick. We started to cover this yesterday as well. So Rava asked Rav Nachman, if that is so, by what means are the stones of a place of worship dedicated to Mercury rendered prohibited, as they do not break apart when they are thrown? So Rav Nachman said to Rava, this question was difficult for me as well, and I asked Rabba bar Avu about it, and Rabba bar Avu said that Chia bar Rav and Chia bar Rav, he asked Chia bar Rav, and Chia bar Rav asked Rav. And Rav said to Chia bar Rav, this action is comparable to the act of enlarging the object of idolatry, right? Adding stones around it enlarges the idol itself. So the stones are not rendered prohibited as an offering brought in idolatry. Rather, they are considered part of the pile that is dedicated to Mercury itself. It's like they've become part of the idol, and that's what would render the stones prohibited. Presumably, if that's the case, it's not an offering, but it becomes part of the idol. If an idolater removed those rocks, he took it out of the realm of idolatry, that would render those rocks permitted. But a Jew could not remove it, because a Jew cannot remove an idol or a piece of an idol from the realm of idolatry and render it permitted. Rava said to Rav Nachman, this works out well according to the one who says that the object of idolatry of a Gentile is prohibited immediately. But according to the one who says that it is not forbidden until it is worshipped, let it be permitted, as he did not worship it, since he sacrificed no offering to it. So Rav Nachman said to Rava, each and every one of the stones becomes part of the object of idolatry and is also considered an offering to the other stone that preceded it. Very interesting ruling. So Rava replied, if so, at least the last stone should be permitted, as nothing has yet been sacrificed to it. Rav Nachman said to Rava, if you know which one it is, you may go and take it, as it is indeed permitted. Rav Ashi says even the last stone is permitted. Even the last stone is forbidden, as each and every one of the stones becomes an offering to itself and also an offering to the other stone that preceded it. Right? So it's this very interesting case. Did we add to the idol, or did we bring an offering to it when we added, or when the idolater added stones to it? Answer, yes. Both things are happening simultaneously, because this is an unusual case in that Mercury is worshipped by adding stones to it, by adding stones to it, right? Not offering stones to it, but by adding stones to it. But because he's worshipped that way, it's like an offering, and because it becomes part of the idol, it's also becoming part of the idol. Rava replied, we learned in a Mishna on page 51b, and we're on 51a now, so we're coming to this. It's our next Mishna, if one found a garment, money, or vessels at the head of Mercury, they are permitted, as they are not an offering, but were left there for some other reason, because it's not typically the way that idolaters worship Mercury to bring these kinds of objects. If one found vine branches laden with clusters of grapes, or wreaths made of stalks, or containers of wine, oil, or flour, or any item like the like of which is sacrificed on the altar there, then that item is prohibited. It wasn't brought there incidentally, it was brought there as part of idolatry. The Gemara asks, granted, with regard to wine, oil, or flour, there is a sacrificial rite comparable to those rites performed inside the Holy Temple. And there is a rite that is similar to the sprinkling of blood that scatters the offering. But in the case of vine branches laden with clusters of grapes and wreaths made of stalks, there is neither a sacrificial rite comparable to those rites performed inside the temple, as these items are not sacrificed on the altar in the temple, nor is there a rite that is similar to the sprinkling of blood on the altar that scatters the offering. And Rava said that Ula said the Mishna is referring to a case where he initially picked the grapes for that purpose in order to sacrifice them in idolatrous worship. And the act of picking the fruit is comparable to slaughtering an animal, and it renders them forbidden. New subject. Rabbi Abahu says that Rabbi Yochanan says, from where is it derived concerning one who slaughters a blemished animal in idolatry that he is exempt? This is a surprising ruling, right? The basic idea here is we cannot, it is against halacha, when the temple is standing and the Jewish people are bringing offerings on the altar in Jerusalem, it is prohibited, strictly prohibited, to bring an animal as an offering that is blemished. For example, it's missing a limb. So according to this, if a Jew brought such an animal that would be unfit for the altar in Jerusalem and offered it, right, brought it in such a way that it would be characterized as an offering to an idol, then he would be exempt from liability for violating the prohibition on idolatry, even though the animal was brought to the idol as an offering, because we wouldn't bring such an animal to the altar, right? So here they're stressing that for something to be considered idolatry, if it's not the usual manner of worship for the idol, that it has to be comparable to something that we do in the Holy Temple. And since we would never bring a blemished animal, therefore bringing this blemished animal to the idol would not be considered idolatry. This would not be the case if that idol is normally worshipped by idolaters by bringing blemished animals. But let's say they don't do that either. So then what did the Jew do? Nothing, according to one of the views. Let's keep reading. Rabbi Bachu says that Rabbi Yochanan says, from where is it derived concerning one who slaughters a blemished animal in idolatry that he is exempt? It is derived from a verse, as it is stated, quote, he that sacrifices to the gods, save to the Lord only, shall be utterly destroyed, right? A Jew who commits idolatry by bringing offerings to idols shall be destroyed. The verse contrasts sacrificing an offering to the Lord with sacrificing an offering to idols, indicating that the Torah prohibits only sacrificial rites that are comparable to those rites performed inside the temple, and blemished animals are disqualified from being sacrificed in the temple. Rava discussed the matter. With regard to what type of blemish does this apply? If we say that it applies in the case of a blemish on the cornea of the eye, that is difficult. Now that such an offering is fit for descendants of Noah to offer to the Most High on their personal altar, very interesting, not Jews, but not idolaters. Who are we talking about? Noahides, right? Noahides are non-Jews who hold by the Torah. They are not idolaters. They recognize that God is God, and they can bring offerings to God on their own altars. They bring animal offerings. And what counts as a blemish for us may not count as a blemish for them. This is a very minor blemish, some kind of a scratch in the cornea of the eye of the animal. Even such a tiny little blemish for us would disqualify the animal from being brought on the altar. But it would not disqualify the animal for a Noahide bringing an offering on his altar to God, right? To God the Most High. So now that such an offering is fit for Noahides to offer to the Most High on their personal altar, is it necessary to state that it is considered an offering with regard to the prohibition of idolatry? Rather, the law that one who slaughters a blemished animal in idolatrous worship is exempt, meaning a Jew who does this, is stated with regard to an animal that is lacking a limb. And it is in accordance with the statement of Rabbi Lazar. As Rabbi Lazar says, from where is it derived that with regard to an animal that is lacking a limb, it is prohibited for the descendants of Noah, for Noahides, to sacrifice it to God? This is derived from a verse, as it is stated, and of every living thing of all flesh, two of every sort, you shall bring into the ark to keep them alive with you. Genesis 6:19. The Torah stated of every living thing, indicating that Noah should bring into the ark an animal whose extremity whose extremities are living, as some of the animals would subsequently be used as offerings, right? He brought 2 of every animal, except for the kosher animals. There he brought 7 pairs, because some of them were used as offerings. Perhaps also they got eaten on the ark. Although it was only until after the flood, right, ended, that God said you can eat meat. So probably they were just used as offerings. The Gemara asks, this works out well according to the one who says that a treifa cannot bear offspring. A treifa, this is an animal that would be otherwise kosher, but it has some kind of a wound or blemish that will cause it to die within 12 months. So that is rendered unfit, both to be brought as an offering and to be eaten, right? Even though it's kosher, and even though we would slaughter it in a kosher manner, if it's a treifa, we can't eat it. Non-Jews are perfectly fit to eat it. They no problem. There's nothing wrong with the meat. It's just that this quality of being a treifa, that it's going to die within 12 months of some wound or illness or something that it has, it renders it unfit for us, both for eating and to be brought as an offering. Okay, so what is that? How is that relevant? According to the one who says that a treifa can bear offspring, even though it will die within a year, it can give birth to offspring, then what can be said? According to this opinion, a treifa cannot be excluded by the phrase to keep seed alive, since it can procreate. So the Gemara answers, the verse states, you shall bring into the ark to keep them alive with you. Genesis 6:19, and the term with you indicates that the verse is referring to animals that are similar to you. This is excluding a treifa. So the Gemara challenges this. But perhaps Noah himself was a treifa. Maybe he had some kind of a condition. And after the whole ordeal with the ark and the waters receded and they came out, maybe he was going to die within 12 months. In that case, one cannot exclude a treifa from the comparison of animals to Noah. And the Gemara explains, it is written about Noah that he was a man righteous and without blemish. Genesis 6:9, indicating that he was physically whole. He was not a treifa. So if we're comparing animals to Noah, it's not in the sense that he and they are treifas. The Gemara challenges, well, perhaps the term without blemish is referring to his conduct and not to his physical attributes. And the Gemara explains the term righteous is written about him, indicating that his conduct was faultless. And therefore the term without blemish is necessarily referring to his physical completeness. The Gemara challenges this. Perhaps the term without blemish is referring to his conduct, and the term righteous is referring to his good deeds. And the Gemara explains, you cannot say that Noah himself was a treifa, as if it enters your mind to say that Noah was a treifa, you must say that the merciful one said to Noah, bring into the ark animals that are similar to you, and that would be treifas. But do not bring whole unblemished animals into the ark. Obviously, God didn't say that. That's not reasonable. The Gemara asks, now that the disqualification of a treifa is derived from the term with you, why do I need the phrase to keep seed alive? And the Gemara answers, if one excluded a treifa only from the term with you, I would say that Noah brought the animals into the ark merely for the purpose of companionship. And therefore, even an aged animal who could not bear offspring, and even one who was castrated, could have been brought into the ark. The phrase to keep seed alive, therefore, teaches us the reason that the animals were brought onto the ark, namely to keep that species of animal alive in the world and survive the flood. Rabbi Elazar says, from where is it derived concerning one who slaughters an animal as an offering to Mercury, that he is liable, even though it is not typically worshipped in this manner? The idolaters don't bring animals to Mercury. They poop in front of it. They bring stones to it. They don't offer animals to it. So if a Jew brought an animal offering to Mercury, he would not be copying the idolaters. We wouldn't say it's idolatry because that's the way that idol is normally worshipped. We would have to say he committed idolatry because he's doing an action that normally would only be done on behalf of God in the holy temple. And he's doing it to Mercury, the idol, the false deity. And how do we know that this is prohibited? From where is it derived? This is derived from a verse. As it is stated, and they shall not slaughter their offering. As it is stated, quote, and they shall not slaughter their offerings anymore to the Seirim, after whom they go astray. This shall be to them an eternal statute throughout their generations. Leviticus 17:7. If this verse is not needed for the matter of prohibiting the worship of an idol in its typical manner, it must apply to something else. The verse cannot be referring to idols that are typically worshipped by slaughtering offerings, as this prohibition is written in a different verse, namely, and lest you go in, quote, and lest you inquire after their gods, saying, how do these nations serve their gods? Even so will I do likewise. In Deuteronomy 12, right, this Moshe at the end of his life giving his final sermon and warning the children of Israel in the most direct and most complete and most explicit and most forceful possible terms that as they go into the Holy Land, do not become like the idolaters in the land and around you, because if you ever, stray into idolatry, you will lose your right to live in the Holy Land that God was giving the children of Israel at that time. And so Moses warns them in this way, Deuteronomy 12:30. So one must therefore apply the verse to the matter of prohibiting the worship of an idol in an atypical manner. So what constitutes worship of an idol in an atypical manner? Well, first it has to be worship. Since it's not the typical manner, what constitutes worship? We're getting that definition from what constitutes worship for us in the Holy Temple. The Gemara asks, but with regard to this verse, does it come to teach this prohibition? Right, the Gemara now suggests that verse is actually needed for something else. This verse is required for that which is taught in Baraisa. With regard to the prohibition against sacrificing offerings outside the Mishkan, outside the tabernacle. This was long before the temple itself was built, when they were bringing sacrifices in the tabernacle, the temporary and portable temple, so to speak, that we had in the wilderness and then was brought into the land of Israel. Right, so we also we could bring offerings to God on the official altar, so to speak, but we could not, as Jews, bring offerings to God in a place not designated for that purpose. Right, we could not build personal altars. There were a few short periods in Jewish history when that was permitted, but the standard practice is that was, for most of Jewish history, that was not permitted. Now we're on page 51b. Because the verse states, any man that slaughters an ox outside the camp and to the entrance of the tent of meeting, he did not bring it to sacrifice an offering to the Lord. This is Leviticus 17:3-4. Until this point, the verse is speaking about sacrificial animals that one consecrated during a period when the prohibition of sacrificing offerings on private altars was in effect, right? Not permitted to use private altars after the tabernacle was erected. Prior to that, they could, right? Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, they brought sacrifices to God. There was no temple or tabernacle at that time, so they built private altars. It was permitted then. But once the Mishkan was built in the wilderness, the tabernacle was built in the wilderness, no longer permitted. And this teaches, and then he also sacrificed them during a period when the prohibition of sacrificing on private altars was in effect. So this is apparent as the punishment for sacrificing. This is apparent as the punishment for sacrificing them, right, in the wrong place, is stated in the verse, as it is stated, quote, and to the entrance of the tent of meeting, he did not bring it. He violated this prohibition when he sacrificed an offering to the Lord before the tabernacle of the Lord. That man who didn't bring it to the right place, he shall be cut off from among his people. That's charis, which the sages argue about in other places in the Talmud. What does charis mean? But it's some form of excision, right? That your life will be shortened, that you'll be removed from some aspect of the world to come. It's not good. You do not want charis. We have heard from that verse, the punishment. But with regard to the prohibition against sacrificing on a private altar, from where is it derived? Very often the Torah has to give two things for things that are prohibited. A verse that prohibits such an action, and a different verse that discusses if you violate that prohibition, what will your punishment be? Right? The fact that you will receive charis, death at the hands of heaven, that's the punishment. Where's the verse that prohibits? The verse states, take heed to yourself lest you offer up your burnt offerings in every place that you see, right? Wherever you feel like doing it. That's not permitted. And the Gemara comments, and this is in accordance with the principle that Rabbi Avin says that Rabbi Ilya says, as Rabbi Avin says that Rabbi Ilya says, wherever it is stated, beware, lest, or do not, This is nothing other than a prohibition. Makes sense. The Baraisa continues from that point onward. The verse is speaking about sacrificial animals that one consecrated during a period when there was permission to sacrifice offerings on private altars, i.e. before the tabernacle was erected. And then one sacrificed them outside the tabernacle during a period when the prohibition came into effect. Right? So it's a very specialized prohibition for people who were there when the tabernacle was built. God said, yeah, well, this animal that you designated, before the tabernacle was built, well, now the tabernacle is built. So you have to bring it here if that's possible. And that this is what that law is talking about is apparent, as it is stated, in order that the children of Israel shall bring their sacrifices which they slaughter upon the open field, that they shall bring them to the Lord, to the entrance of the tent of meeting. The phrase, their sacrifices which they slaughter, this is interpreted as referring to offerings that I have previously permitted you to slaughter on private altars. This verse teaches that those offerings may now be sacrificed only inside the tabernacle. And the phrase upon the open field teaches that in the case of anyone who slaughters an opening on a private altar during the period when the prohibition of sacrificing on private altars is in effect, the prohibition on doing that is in effect, even if he sacrifices the offering to God, the verse ascribes to him blame as if he is slaughtering in the open field for idolatry. Right? You can't pick and choose. You can't make up your own version of Judaism because it makes sense to you. The person said, what are you talking about? I'm sacrificing to God. I'm not sacrificing to some fake deity. I'm not building a statue. I'm sacrificing to God. Yeah, but the Torah says you don't do that. Right? You don't do that. Judaism takes work. It takes study. It takes checking in with your community and your Rav and figuring out what's permitted and what's not. It's incredibly complicated and so many rules. And we can come to violate them by mistake in all kinds of ways because it's so difficult to know what the law is in so many different situations. Very, very study, a religion that requires tremendous study and dedication to do it right. That's the nature of Judaism. And you can't just make it up because it makes sense to you. It seems logical to you how it should be. Yeah, Judaism's not like that. A lot of our laws are not logical at all. We do it because God said so. And when cases where it's just not clear what God was saying to us, our sages step in and define it for us and tell us what God is saying to us. And we need them to do that because God said that would be the system. That when there's a question in future generations that you couldn't answer, the elders in that generation would decide. And not only did Judaism and the Torah bring democracy into the world in the sense that the elders would vote and we would follow the majority, but also meritocracy, right? Because who gets to be a sage? Not the child of a sage, but the people who are worthy and rise to the level of being respected and recognized as sages. Right? The verse continues that they shall bring them to the Lord. This is a positive mitzvah, positive commandment, a thou shalt, as opposed to a thou shalt not. This is a positive mitzvah to sacrifice even offerings that were consecrated before the tabernacle was erected in the wilderness. And from where is it derived that there is a prohibition against sacrificing them outside the tabernacle? Well, the verse states, and they shall not slaughter their offerings anymore to the Seirim after whom they go astray. This shall be to them an eternal statute throughout their generations. Now, one might have thought that sacrificing these offerings outside the tabernacle would be punishable by Karas, as this is the law with regard to offerings that are consecrated after the temple was consecrated. Therefore, the verse states, this shall be to them an eternal statute throughout their generations. One can infer from this verse that this, the punishment for transgressing a positive mitzvah and a prohibition, applies to them, but no other punishment applies to them. In any event, the Baraisa interprets the verse, and they shall not slaughter their offerings anymore to the Seirim, as prohibiting the sacrificing to God on private altars. And this is not, as Rabbi Elazar interpreted it, as prohibiting the worship of an idol in an atypical manner. This is all to show that we have not yet derived where in the Torah it says that we are prohibited from worshiping idols in a manner that is not how those idols are worshipped by idolaters. So we know it's prohibited, but how do we know it's prohibited? From where do we derive that in the Torah? Rava said one may derive both laws from the verse.
as the term "and they shall not" can be interpreted as referring to two distinct prohibitions. Read into the verse, "and they shall not slaughter." This is interpreted as prohibiting offerings to God on private altars. And also read into the verse, "and they shall not slaughter anymore to the Seirim," which is interpreted as prohibiting the worship of an idol in an atypical manner. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 4. Mishnah 2. If one found money, a garment, or vessels at the head of Mercury, this idolatrous statue, these are permitted, right? Because basically they're saying it's a coincidence. Idolaters don't bring money, garments, or vessels to Mercury as a form of worship. So it just happened to be sitting there. It's a found object, and it would be permitted for use to a Jew. Obviously, if you can find its owner, you have an obligation to return it to the owner. But if it indeed is an ownerless object, it's not going to be rendered permitted as an object of idolatry, even though it was found in the vicinity of an idol. Why would we think? Because idolaters don't use these objects in their idolatry. But if one found vine branches laden with clusters of grapes, or wreaths made of stalks, or containers of wine, oil, or flour, or any other item, the likes of which is sacrificed on the altar there, i.e. it was used in the performance of idolatry, then those objects would be prohibited, meaning we Jews could never benefit from them. That's Mishnah 2. Now the Mishnah teaches that money, clothing, or vessels found at the head of the idol are not forbidden. And the Gemara asks, from where are these matters derived? Rav Chia Bar Yosef says that Rabbi Oshaya says, one verse states, "And you have seen their detestable things and their idols, wood and stone, silver and gold, which are with them." Deuteronomy 29:16. We're describing the idols. And one verse states, "You shall not covet the silver or the gold that is on them, nor take it for yourself." Deuteronomy 7:25. How do we reconcile these two texts? The second verse mentions the prohibition only of silver and gold, whereas the first verse also mentions wood and stone. So the Gemara answers, this teaches that the prohibition with regard to those items that are with them, i.e. those that are found next to the idols, are similar to the prohibition with regard to those items that are on them. Just as with regard to those items that are on the idols, a decorative item, for example, gold or silver, would become prohibited for us. But that which is not a decorative item is permitted. So too, with regard to those items that are with the idols, a decorative item is prohibited, and that which is not a decorative item is permitted, right? So these things that we're talking about that you found there, they weren't like on the idol to enhance the appearance of the idol. They were just found nearby. If they were on the idol in a manner that enhances the appearance of the idol, of course they would be prohibited. The Gemara challenges this, but one could say the contrary, that the prohibition with regard to those items that are on them is similar to the prohibition with regard to those items that are with them, meaning just as with regard to those items that are with the idols, everything that is found with them is included in the prohibition. As the verse mentions wood and stone, which are not decorative items, so too with regard to those items that are on the idols, everything that is on them is forbidden. And the Gemara explains, if so, the verse should not state the prohibition with regard to items that are on the idols, as it may be inferred kal v'chomer from the prohibition with regard to items that are found next to them. If those are going to be prohibited, then obviously the objects that are found on the idols would be prohibited. But the Gemara challenges this derivation. The Mishnah teaches that money that is found at the head of the idol is permitted. And this is difficult, as money is a decorative item. The school of Rabbi Yanai say the ruling of the Mishnah is not stated with regard to a case where coins were placed on the idol in order to adorn it, because that would surely render the money prohibited. Rather, the ruling of the Mishnah stated with regard to a case where the money is inside a purse that is tied onto the idol and suspended from its neck for safekeeping, or left there as a payment for the priests. It has nothing to do with actual idolatry. Somebody's just storing some money. In fact, they're using the idol in a way that is demeaning to the idol. Right? If you're using the idol as a table, a storage place, a drawer, a hidey hole, right? That's not showing respect to a so-called God, right? You wouldn't store your stuff on the temple, on the altar in the holy temple. So that's a demeaning that's a demeaning action for this so-called idol. Therefore, that would not render that money prohibited. The Gemara challenges this. No, I just said that. The Gemara challenges what I just said. The Mishnah teaches that a garment found at the head of the idol is permitted. Well, this is difficult. A garment? That's certainly a decorative item. But the school of Rabbi Yannai say the ruling of the Mishnah is not stated with regard to a garment that was placed on the idol to adorn it. Rather, the ruling of the Mishnah is stated with regard to a garment that is folded and placed on the head of the idol. Again, you're using the idol as a table, a drawer, a storage place. The Gemara, or like a hook, just a hanging place for your own benefit, for a place to keep that garment. The Gemara challenges this. The Mishnah teaches that vessels found at the head of the idol are permitted. Well, vessels are decorative items, but Rav Papa said the Mishnah is referring to where a pot is placed upside down on the head of the idol, in which case it does not serve as a decoration. Again, you're just using the idol as a stand for your pot. Rav Asi Bar Chia says any item that is found within the inner partitions that surround the idol, even water or salt, is prohibited, as it is assumed to be an offering brought in the performance of idolatry. And with regard to items that are found outside the partitions, a decorative item is prohibited, but that which is not a decorative object is permitted. Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina says, we have a tradition that the law with regard to the partitions applies neither to Peor nor to Mercury, right? So the way that Peor and Mercury were worshipped, different than other kinds of idols. And so since it was well known how those idols were worshipped, if you found these objects near those idols, it would be clear that those items were not brought to worship those idols. The Gemara asks, with regard to what law is this stated? If we say that this means that with regard to Peor and Mercury, even items that are found inside the partitions are treated like those that are found outside the partitions and that they are permitted, well, this is difficult. Now, Peor is worshipped by defecating before it. Even excrement is offered to Peor. Is it possible that its worshippers do not sacrifice water and salt to it? Although water and salt are not generally offered to the idol, in the case of Peor, they certainly can be. If even poop can be offered to it, then maybe anything could be. So rather, Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina means that with regard to Peor and Mercury, even items that are found outside the partitions are treated like those that are found inside the partitions, and they are prohibited, even if they are not decorative items. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 2. Now, Mishnah 3, and I'm actually close to done. So if you got questions or comments, please get them in now. In the case, whoa, what's going on here? Trying to get ready to answer questions. Okay. In the case of an object of idolatry that had a garden or a bathhouse, one may derive benefit from them when it is not to the advantage of the idolatry, i.e., when he does not pay for his use. But one may not derive benefit from them when it is to their advantage, i.e., if one is required to pay for his use. So if, for example, right, a house of idolatry was running a vegetarian restaurant, right? And the idolaters don't eat vegetarian food in that restaurant as a form of worshiping their idols, but the proceeds of that restaurant are used for the upkeep of that temple of idolatry. So sounds like it would be prohibited to eat in that restaurant. Now, they didn't mention restaurants, they mentioned garden or bathhouse, but the concept is, it seems to me, right, that there's a useful place, a garden or a bathhouse. You're not performing idolatry by being there. So as long as your being there doesn't benefit the idolatry, it would be permitted. But if your being there benefits the idolatry because you pay for it, and those proceeds go to the idolatry, prohibited. And one may not derive benefit from them when it is to their advantage, i.e. if one is required to pay for his use. If the garden or the bathhouse belong jointly to the place of idolatry and to others, right, not idolaters who are part of that idolatry, then one may derive benefit from them, both when it is to their advantage and when it is not to their advantage, because they're only partial owners. A Gentile's object of idolatry is prohibited immediately. This is a different ruling now. A Gentile's object of idolatry is prohibited immediately, meaning as soon as he manufactures it for that purpose, even though it has not yet been used for idolatry. If a Jew manufactures an idol, right, it's not prohibited because it's not an idol yet. It was created in the realm of Torah, in the realm of a Jew. And so it's not an idol. It's just a statue. If it then gets worshipped, it becomes an object of idolatry and will be prohibited forever. That's the Mishnah. Now the Gemara. Abaye says, the case where use of the garden or the bathhouse is to the financial advantage of the idolatry, this is referring to a case where it is to the financial advantage of the priests of idolatry who receive payment for the use of the garden or the bathhouse. The case where it is not to their financial advantage, this is referring to a case where it is not to the financial advantage of the priests. This is to the exclusion of a situation where using the facility is only to the financial advantage of the worshipers of the idol, in which case one is permitted to derive benefit from them. And now the Gemara comments on this. There are those who teach Abaye's statement with regard to the latter clause of the Mishnah. If the garden or the bathhouse belong to the place of idolatry and to others, one may derive benefit from them, both when it is to their advantage and when it is not to their advantage. Abaye says the term when it is to their advantage, this is referring to a case where the financial advantage belongs to other owners, while the term when it is not to their advantage is referring to a case where it is not to the financial advantage of the priests. But if the use of the place is to the financial advantage of the priests, whether others are participating in that financial advantage or not, one may not derive benefit from the place. And finally, the Gemara notes, according to the one who teaches Abaye's statement with regard to the case presented in the latter clause of the Mishnah, where the garden or the bathhouse is only partially owned by the place of idolatry, all the more so does this statement apply to the case presented in the first clause of the Mishnah, where the garden or bathhouse is owned exclusively by the place of idolatry. But according to the one who teaches Abaye's statement with regard to the case presented in the first clause, Abaye's statement applies only to that case. But with regard to the case presented in the latter clause, since there are others who are not idolaters, who own the place together with the place of idolatry, then even if the use of the garden or bathhouse does advantage the priests, it would be permitted to use that garden or bathhouse. That's the second view, right? Where does the law end up on that? Why don't we just read that? The Rambam rules that if a garden or bathhouse is owned jointly by an object of idolatry and by others, one is permitted to use it, even if the priests derive benefit from its use, as long as he does not actually give payment. You're not giving money that's going to, go to accrue to these priests of idolatry. You could use it if you could use it for free. But if you're going to pay to use it, and even some of that money is going to go to the priests, no. According to the Kesef Mishnah of the Rambam, the ruling of the Rambam is in accordance with the first version of this statement of Abaye, in that the favor referred to as we're not going to get into the nuance of that. Okay, let's take some questions. Ifa. In so many circumstances, intention is required. It seems to me that if the intention is to commit idolatry, even if it is the wrong action, it should count. If he is just breaking the stick, it shouldn't. Yes, certainly for intentional violation of the prohibition. But we're also talking about the unwitting violation, which, when the temple is standing, would give rise to liability to bring a sin offering, right? Now, if it's circumstances beyond his control, there's not going to be any liability. But if it's basically a negligent violation because he should have been more careful, this is probably in that realm where we're talking about, there was an idol there. He didn't, stay away from it. He threw a stick. This is like such a borderline case, right? Where I think it is hard to understand because, to compare throwing a stick to sprinkling blood on the altar is a stretch. But that's exactly what the sages were testing. How much of a stretch is it before we say it's just not related or connected at all, or maybe it's not such a stretch and we have to be more careful because in matters of idolatry, the sages were so stringent. Why were they so stringent? Because God is so stringent, repeating the command to distance ourselves from idolatry in so many different ways and places in the Torah. Joseph, wasn't there a story in Joshua where cookware from idolaters were purified? How does that fit in with the idea that only an idolater can rescind the usage of idolatry in an object? Well, wait a minute. Are we talking about cookware that was used in idolatry? Or are we talking about cookware that was used by idolaters? Right? If it was used for idolatry, then perhaps even so, as long as it wasn't an offering, right? Even so, the idolater could remove it from the realm of idolatry. If we captured it from them, no, right? We could not remove it from idolatry. But if we simply captured vessels that belong to idolaters, but were never used in idolatry, then we're not talking about removing something from the realm of idolatry. Just the fact that it was owned by idolaters doesn't put it in the realm of idolatry if it had never anything to do with the practice of idolatry. Rather, we're just talking about a vessel that came basically from a Gentile into Jewish ownership. And so basically we're going to toivel it, right? If it's the type of vessel that can be purified with fire, we'd use fire, otherwise water. But there are some kinds of vessels that cannot be purified, right? I think clay vessels could not. Metal vessels could. Bill, this is interesting. This is, if I'm remembering correctly, which is a big if, the first time we're hearing about the rules for Noahide sacrifices. I think you're right. I feel like we haven't heard that before. Right. I don't recall hearing that either. But isn't that interesting, right? That Noahides could bring sacrifices on their altars. Now, is it proper to do so? It's just they're not prohibited in the same way that we are. They're certainly not obligated. And I would not say that whatever our discussion was in passing really teaches us the laws of Noahides. Like you said, it was the first time we've heard mention of it. I don't know that we learned what the rules actually are. Bill also says, with regard to using an idol to store money, I don't know. Well, I can understand this as being demeaning for something like, say, a garment. Temples were often used as treasuries in the ancient world, so it isn't entirely out of character for idolaters to entrust their money to their idol. But if you're saying they're entrusting it and they're going to take it back, they haven't given it to the idol, right? So it seems like, okay, they're saying it's a safe place to store money, but is that idolatry? Isn't it somewhat demeaning or at least neutral? I mean, it's not idolatry. They're just using the idol as a storage place. I don't think that, I think the sages were saying that's not idolatry. And that's why that money would not become prohibited, because it was never really brought into the realm of idolatry. Now we see that the realm of idolatry is not, we're talking about a physical realm, right? We're talking about, was it somehow used in the practice of idolatry? And finally, Bill, on the matter of a piece of land that brings money to the priest, the technical term for all of this in the English language, in English language law, is glebe land, Glebe, glebe land, or glebe property, pronounced glebe. Fascinating. I don't really know what that is. But you're saying land that supports priests. And this, I assume this applies to idolaters like you're talking about. And therefore, for a Jew, prohibited. That's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow. And by the way, also for non-Jews, for Noahides, prohibited for all people. Because remember, idolatry is prohibited for all people. Noahides means everyone else. When we say Noahides these days, we mean people who recognize God as God and sort of submit to the laws of the Torah and the commandments that obligate them, the 7 Noahide commandments. But in fact, all people are Noahides. All people are descendants of Noah. All humans are descendants of Noah. Jews are obligated in the 613 commandments of the Torah. Everyone else is obligated in the Noahide commandments, so few recognize that. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we will be together again tomorrow, Thursday at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a good night.